Welcome back to the lab. We continue progress with the Locost 7, despite Glenn getting distracted and playing with that. We'll talk about what I did with this later on. But anyway, this should look a little bit different from the last time you saw it, hopefully. A second-hand radiator from our mates at Nissan King. Cut and shut, I guess you'd call it. Chopped up. Not height-wise, that's very hard to do. Basically impossible to do in your home workshop, or certainly not practical, but you can cut the width down easy enough. Obviously we're talking about when it's got vertical tubes here. If it's cross flow, then that's the opposite way. A couple of brackets made up. They're asymmetrical because the radiator has to be to one side because we've got a steering shaft that runs through here. So just tried to kind of hide the fact that that's offset over there with the position and the shape of the brackets. It doesn't look terrible when you stand here and look at it like that. Engine has run. That's fired and run for a few seconds. Carburetors were taken apart and cleaned up a little bit. I didn't get carried away. They're certainly, I wouldn't call them a rebuild. The rear one, the accelerator pump diaphragm, is leaking like a sieve. We do have a couple of rebuild kits thanks to Palmside from down the line there. We've got those to rebuild them. Someone asked if they were Webers or Delortos. I think I said they were Webers at some point in time. Look, when I said they were Webers, I just did not even look at them, hadn't looked at them at all, hadn't opened my eyes. They were just carburetors hanging off the side of a motor, right? And that's just an assumption that people make in general. They're not. The Delortos, it says right there, as soon as you read that, that's what they are. Vacuum advanced diaphragm on the distributor is shagged. That's got a hole in it, doesn't work. There's no advanced port on here anyway, and the fella that's going to tune it reckons now you don't need it anyway, so it's fine. Spark timing was set incorrectly and the thing wouldn't even fire. I've moved that, I've adjusted the distributor to the correct position. It was out by a tooth. Someone has had it off and put it back down in the wrong spot. That's pretty normal, pretty standard for distributors. That's fixed, that works. I have not done the exhaust or the muffler yet. Obviously, we thought we might be able to have some extractors from our mates down the road at Kobe, and we had a bit of a ferret through what they had, but nah, nothing fits. And it's, to be honest, it's not really the sort of job, not at this point anyway, that we really want to spend the time and the money involved to hand make something bespoke for this. We're kind of just hoping to be something off the shelf. It'd be like $300 or something like that, and you just chop it up and modify it so it comes out here instead of going down the bottom under the floor. But no such luck, so we'll probably just run those. I do need to make an exhaust manifold gasket for it, or at least maybe put some sealant on there and hope that that's enough that it doesn't blow out too much. Not likely that'll work. So yes, we have to make a gasket. That is pretty much where we're at. You'll see we've got a radiator cap on top of here now. I've cut up the top thermostat housing, lowered it down so it's lower profile, chopped the top off it, can't speak the England today, Glenn, and put a radiator cap, boss, receptacle, fitting, whatever we want to call it, one of those, bring spanking new one of those on top of that there, and clearly have removed that from the top tank on the radiator. That's slightly uphill to there, so we're never going to have to worry about bleeding that. It'll be fine, it'll work good. We've got from, I can't remember their name, sorry, Cardwell's, there you go, remembered it, a Jazz fuel cell. It's only 15 litres, and everyone's like, oh, that's pretty small. That's only 120, 130 horsepower, a 15 litre fuel tank. It's going to run for a significant period of time. As far as grass gymkhanas and stuff like that, that is actually a decent amount of fuel for what this thing's going to be doing. If they want to do track days, they're probably going to get 10 laps or more out of it before they run out of fuel, so it'll be fine. The fittings on there actually came out here, which was a nuisance based on where I want to sit the tank, which is approximately where it is there. So I've blanked those off and I've put one fitting. Can we even see it? Yep, you can see it, the blue fitting that is right in the middle of your screen there. So we've got just one fuel fitting, AN6, coming out of the bottom of there. There's an electric fuel pump there on the bench there. That's going to go in this. We've got lots of space. You could go anywhere in the back here and run a couple of wires to it. Run the fuel line, which is heavy duty Aeroflow fuel line there. We'll run that from here to there somehow, somewhere nice and safe. Could go along the top of the transmission tunnel, but if you manage to blow the drive shaft to pieces somehow and rupture that, then you're sitting in a barbecue, so that's probably not where it'll go, but we'll figure something out. All right, other things that have happened. The owner has secured off lovely Trade Me some new front guards. We are going to run, they're stuck together, right? Good on them. We're going to run that style of guard on the front of it, rather than the big sweeping clamshell thingies that weren't going to fit this particularly well anyway. So we've got to make some brackets for those from there to the knuckle somehow. But what I'm looking at this morning and scratching my head is the front end here, and I talked about that being crooked earlier on, and it is. If we sit that down on its mount properly, that steering rack is way wrong. So it's out by 3 or 4 millimeters, right? So it needs to be slightly more up than what it's not going to sit in the right. It needs to be about there. That might be slightly higher than it needs to be, but I'm looking at the brackets that it's attached to. I haven't measured the thickness, but I think this is like 3 mil thick. No, it isn't. No, that's like 2 mil thick panel steel strap or something that's bent around here. It's pretty flimsy. To have your steering on that, it's a bit, not sure how long that will last. And the front suspension tab mount point, that's reasonable size steel, that's no problem. That attachment to the bottom there, it's not too bad as long as you've got reasonable support elsewhere. But what we've got is like 15 mil square tube that's probably only a millimeter thick. And that's got a piece stuck onto there and a piece stuck onto there, and this piece comes over here, and then it's got an angle welded into it, and then it's stuck onto this 25 mil here, and that's only got that real thin stuff there. So any suspension forces on here are just going to wobble this tab relatively easily compared to what it needs to be. And we've got this other tube, which is, again, that's somewhere in between. That's not 25 mil, it's maybe about 20 mil. It's somewhere in between the this size that's used everywhere else and this size that's used here. That's fine, that's probably an adequate size. It's just weird that there's different sizes all over the show, right? That could have, should have, would have probably been better if it was down here where my finger is there, so that this tab that this slot's attached to doesn't have to do a 90 and come up. So we can take this off, we put this down here, and then we have a flat point across there, be a little bit stronger, and do something a bit nicer with this arrangement here. This is all just a bit sort of, he was operating off plans, the fella that made it, so I'm not sure what the plans were, what they described there, but that kind of looks like there's been a little bit of put this on here, and now we need to put that on there, and now we need to put that on there, and you kind of get to the point where you go, maybe if we chop all this stuff off and start again, and we'll have something a little bit nicer, which I'm not having to go at anyone, because that has happened on this thing so many times. So yeah, I'm going to attack this. I'll take these pieces out of the way, chop it up, start again, and get something that's more nicer and betterer. So that's some bits out of the way, as you can see, and that's not an optical illusion. We do have this bar right here is quite a long way out compared to that bar, that bar, that bar. There's a slight discrepancy between this bar and that one. It's not huge, but it's enough you can see it with your eyes. but there's a significant one with that, and also with this. So a little bit more chopping and changing will happen here. As I said earlier, I'm going to take this bar out anyway, right? And we've got enough, there it is on the floor there, we've got enough bar to replace it with 25, so we'll just do that. That's easier. Cheaper than mucking around trying to clean this bar up to use it again. Just throw it away and use a new piece of steel that actually winds up being cheaper, less time involved and less materials and sanding discs and whatnot. And we'll reinvent all of this. So my current plan, which will probably change in 5 seconds as they tend to do, that looks to be pretty close to the same height as this, It's all much of muchness. So we'll delete this and this, delete that. We'll put the 25, not this, the 25 mil size bar to replace this, but down here. And we'll put a big flat plate through there and drill a couple of holes in it, make it look nice and make it look light, and that'll make it more stronger. We could actually, I'll tag something across here, might go all the way down. In fact, we may fold a plate that starts down here and goes up here and back to there like that. That'll do. Put some holes in it so it's lighter and you can get to these nuts, and it'll make it strong and good and square. Or closer to square. And then we'll do something with this thing here. There's got to be a better way than having 2 separate pieces, but I don't want to spend too much time to achieve not a lot. That could be, it's only relatively thin steel, it won't take long to do. That could be one piece all the way through there to make that strong. Of course, this will come down to wherever that face is there. So we'll capture all of that. Make it more goodera. Or we can just move the sway bar mounts out. Let's do that, and then we just put a little tab out the side instead of having a bar going all the way down. Yeah, that's a better idea. Let's do that. Right, quite a lot of the front fell off, mostly just that stuff there, not the boot. It's attached to me, obviously. Chopped up this little bit here that put this bar in that we've been talking about earlier on. Measured it up off the chassis rails at the bottom there. Got that all nice and square and stood back and looked at it, as you do, to double check, and it just didn't look right. You can see it, even with the camera distorting things, taking that into account. That there to there is bigger than that there to there. And so, out with the ruler. Oh my gosh, it is actually quite a long way bigger. We're talking 7 or 8 millimeters higher on this side than it is on that side. Something I hadn't spotted before, quite difficult to do with everything else the way it was, all the suspension parts, and didn't stand out, so I never measured it. That's right, we're going to have to cut some more things. So it's not the worst thing in the world, but we'll just ping this post here, the one the G-clamp's attached to, cut that there, take some out of those, detach this wherever's easier. It might be easier actually at this end than it is at this end, don't ask why, but it might be. And get this come down to here and make sure we don't drag that up to there, because then we'll put the whole chassis like that. So yeah, they're not easy making chassis for cars. We'll probably have to detach this here and this here as well to get that to drop down without pulling real hard out on everything else. There's absolutely no point in stopping here. We might as well square it up as best as we can. There are still some discrepancies depending on what you want to use for your datum point. I've decided we'll just use this area here across the car here as our straight line, because that lines up with that, and that's pretty square to the sides, etc. And the center line of the car, I checked all that earlier on. This bar here isn't. That is not in the right spot, and consequently the 2 front suspension mounts at the bottom, this one, the 4 actually, and the 2 that were on the front here, they're skew off as well. Even though I had shortened up this side of the chassis to try and bring it back in line, it was still just not quite right. Still easier than starting from scratch with a new chassis, and we do kind of want to leave as much of this original as it can be. Ultimately this is someone's granddad's car that he was building, right? So we want to keep that legacy as much as we can. This is why, you know, hey, there's better motors to use and all that sort of stuff. Somebody's granddad, a couple of people's granddad started building this. So we want to try and keep it the original head and the original handle, right? We don't want granddad's axe that's 5 heads and 5 handles down the track. So, cutty, fixy, fixy. As they sometimes do, this took longer than I expected. It's looking pretty good though. Couple of little things I didn't really think about until I offered the rack up for the first time and went, oh, hang on a minute, your perfect plan's not so perfect. But that's what happens. It's dealt with. Mainly this area here, I just didn't think about it basically. We don't have the advantage of having technicians sitting in front of computer-aided drafting software on computers, figuring everything out, going through it over and over and over, and wasting lots of time. We just get it done. So it's actually square now, within, I'm going to say 1 millimeter, maybe 2 at worst. So before we had lengths were wrong, height on this was all wrong, the rack was down and this was up, and all sorts of funny things. I had previously cut through here and here and adjusted the length. It needed it needed that. It needed this to come back and the top to come back and then that to go forward. It's all a bit funny. But it's sorted. Happy with that now. It is square now, and it's significantly stronger. So you might be able to see I've got one nice big plate here on the end with a piece of angle iron across there. It's got angle iron because we need to be able to get to the nuts that are on the other side of this U-bolt under here. So we can't put a box section across there unless we went to little piddly stuff like this so that you'd have the clearance to get your nut on there, but that's perfect. That's way stronger than what we had before. And obviously we've got 25mm box section. We've got a 3mm, much wider 3mm plate running across there. That's bomb proof. That's not coming apart. Compared to what it had was pretty suspicious. It probably would have held, but it didn't inspire confidence, put it that way. So, and then front suspension mounts were really, it was a flimsy, well, it wasn't flimsy, but it was a 5mm tab that came up here, and then it just had this stuff here that was trying to hold it to stop it wobbling around. It really wasn't going to work very well. Not that you have massive forces on something like this, but it was potentially going to cause a problem. It won't now. So instead of, I'm assuming that's 50 by 25 across the front, we've now got 25 box. When this thing comes to pieces, I will be tapering this back and closing that in. That'll just give us just a little bit more clearance at the nose, and we'll put a little bit of a bash plate, a little bit of a lip at the start there. This thing will be doing grass gymkhanas and stuff like that, so it doesn't hurt to spend a tiny little bit of time, and it'd be much better for old mate whoever's sitting in the driver's seat there, if it had a great big dirt mound or something, much better to get a big bump and ride up over the top of it rather than have a nice big flat plate on the front there and just stop dead and hurt yourself, or do some bulldozing, I guess. All we've got to sort out is the holes that were in there. These are these plates that were down there originally. So there's a couple of holes to put in there. I'll drill those in situ so that we know we get them in the right spot. That's for those mount points that you can see there hanging off the suspension. So there's a couple of those to do on each side. And we've got to do, I talked about it, the tab for the U-bolts for the sway bar. We'll attach it to this somehow. I'm just debating whether I cut this piece right off and do a nice lovely bit with it incorporated, or whether we just stitch something on. It's not going to have massive forces on it. It's not a particularly big sway bar. That's it there. I would say it's probably 19 mils diameter or something like that. And that's all that holds it. Let's go over here like that and through a couple of holes in the chassis. So we've just got to do those. You can see the point there where it was wearing originally, and that was these tabs here. I don't want to use those because then they kind of, you can see where the original point was at the top there. They kind of end up in no man's land, and then you have to build a whole heap of structure to hold them. Whereas if we just shift the bushes out to the side and attach to this structure, simpler, easier, better, cleaner, tidier, cheaper, and out of the way of the steering rack to get that in and out when we get to the point where we're putting it back together for the final time. Right, it's a bit late in the day, so we'll call it a day and we'll carry on with that tomorrow. And through the magic of the internet, it's all back together again. That is a good improvement. It's not perfect. It doesn't need to be perfect, but it's pretty good. Pretty awesome. It's within 1 or 2 millimeters, depends how you want to measure it, of where it needs to be, so that's fine. Quite a lot of negative camber on these front wheels that will square up a little bit as it comes down onto the ground, but you can see on your screen she's got a lean that way. Can put bigger shims in here. You see it's had some shims in there from the original build. I did try and shift these out a little bit, but there's only so much chassis rail to work with, right? So they're right on the very edge there. I suppose I could have got that's 6 millimeters thick. I could have got another 6 millimeters by putting them on the outside face of here. And then we might have got a little bit more adjustment on those front ones, which actually takes some of the caster out of it. For this, that's probably okay. That's fine. It doesn't have power steering, so I'll just make the steering a little bit lighter at high speed. Wouldn't have negative caster, so something I might I've just created extra work for myself. I think what I'm going to do is take that back off, which doesn't take long, and weld a 6mm plate on there, and that starts us off in a better spot. We've got, like I say, we're going to do this. We'd rather have negative camber than positive on the front, both the same, according to my digital inclinometer. But anyway, that's basically pretty good. We can fine tune from here before we get things powder coated. I better hurry up, it's going to rain, and when it rains it's going to rain a lot. Went and saw our mates at Repco, got ourselves a 90-degree end sorted on the HT lead into the Dizzy, so that'll keep the bonnet a lot lower profile. It's still going to need a little power bulge where the distributor is there, because it does hang up a bit higher than everything else, and then we can keep the bonnet nice and low profile. You can sort of see where things end up. Also got a thermotat, a new thermostat that's in there. Don't trust the old one, it's so old now it's probably not going to work, so that's ditched and we put brand new one. Got some new spark plugs for it, which are still in the box on the bench. We'll sort those out once we've done the initial fan doodling with the carburetors. I don't want to foul the plugs straight away. The ones that are in okay, they'll do all right for the meantime. Right, it is, it's a bit later than I thought. It's that o'clock on a Friday. I've gone and seen our mates at Ulrich. We've got some aluminium, some seconds actually, some scratchy stuff. And I want to do a little bit on this thing here. I'm going to play with this on the weekend. Very good, couple of phone calls to make to finish off the week. And then weekend. Right, so I'm not sure if I showed you the new rear guards. They had a funny edge on the inside. It was very narrow, which was okay, I could work with that, but it was shaped to suit a curved body, so when these guards bolted on, it wasn't a flat surface. So that was going to be difficult to use, so I took them to our mate at Mike Shaw Fiberglass. I got Mike to stick the flat inside edge there for us on both of those, so those are now good to go, ready to go and mount up onto the car. We've got to do whatever we're doing with the car. We've got to sort out the roll cage in the back here, which will involve chopping and changing some of this stuff and things, and then mounting that fuel fuel cell, that's what we'll call it. You'll see I've blanked off those fittings on the back there. I showed you earlier, didn't I? I remember doing that now. All right, it's time to go. Have a good weekend. Cheers, bye.